Sometime in 2020, I gave a speech to our board of advisors predicting what would happen if Donald Trump were defeated in the 2020 presidential election. At that time, many people predicted that if Joe Biden won, there would be a healing of the nation. There would be an opportunity for national unity. I had a neighbor who lost a child at the hands of an illegal alien driver, somebody who should not have been here, lost his son. He told me he was going to vote for Joe Biden because he believed that Biden would unify the country. Many people voted for Biden believing that that would be the case. Here we are in 2022, and the nation seems more divided than ever. We hear name-calling. We hear the politicized use of law enforcement agencies pursuing partisan objectives. More importantly, we see systemic lawlessness, massive illegality at our borders, the likes of which we've never seen in American history. What happened to national unity? How did we get to this point in the first place? Well, when people divide in the way they are now, they begin to see each other not as political allies who are having conversations but who may disagree, but in fact as enemies. And as a recent book, Woke Incorporated, mentioned, I will simply quote what he says: "When punishment is the first tool we turn to rather than persuasion, we naturally start to see people who disagree with us as enemies, not fellow citizens." And by that, of course, he means we can't have a conversation. We can't deliberate and then reach an agreement. Instead, we start out right out of the box thinking we cannot convince one another that, in fact, someone who disagrees with me has nothing to teach me. Going back to what he said in this book, Woke Inc. Sure, you might think it's the other way around, that because we use punishment, we already think our opponents are enemies. But I, the author, thinks the causation goes equally in both directions. As you turn to punish someone, you are naturally more prone to see them as your enemy than someone to whom you're committed to actually persuading. The beauty of democracy is its invitation to try to persuade the other side. Persuade the other side. The ugliness of today's modern debate is the way it replaces that invitation with a call to using brute force as punishment instead. It's a game in which all players lose, and it leaves us divided as a people in the end. That's Vivek Ramaswamy's book, Woke Inc. We are divided. And why are we divided? Well, our president today is labeling 74 million Americans who voted for Donald Trump as something so horrendous I can't even use the term. It's not backed up by facts. It's not backed up by specifics. It's not even backed up by credible allegations. But this is where we are today. We also see the White House spokesperson trying to convince us that our borders are secure, and that in fact everything going on down there is by design. If the White House spokesperson believes our borders are secure, then by definition she must believe this is by design, this is intentional. What we are seeing along our border, well, it's obviously a full-scale invasion of people who have no right to be in the country, demanding entry, to come in, make a phony asylum claim, get into the U.S. and remain indefinitely, being told, again a lie, that if they're not successful in their asylum claim, they will be promptly removed. This is not only a lie, it underscores that the entire immigration system has become a fraud on the American people. Our immigration system is a fraud on the American people. But what's really important to remember here is what's coming across the border today is actually a trickle. It is, in fact, a very small part of a stream that could be followed up by potentially hundreds of millions of people. When surveys are done around the world of people who would like to move to one of those wealthier Western nations like the United States, you find surveys showing 30, 40 to 50% of the populations finding it would be desirable, if possible, to move. Not surprisingly, people are coming across that border not just from Mexico anymore, or even the Northern Triangle, but from other countries in Latin America and even from all around the world. So why are we being told things that just aren't so? Ronald Reagan once said, the problem with liberals, and these are not liberals when we talk about enemies yelling at each other, liberals believe in conversation. Liberals believe in the free exchange of ideas. What we have here are politicians who no longer believe in dialogue, who no longer believe in even the concept of argumentation. They believe only in demonization and name-calling. Why should they tell us the truth about what's going on the border? Why should they tell us the truth about anything if it advances a power agenda? So what does this mean for the future of America? If things are happening on the border and we can't get an honest conversation from our political leaders? Well, it means the nation is in big trouble. It means the republic is in big trouble. When the rule of law collapses, when the rule of law is no longer impartially administered, when millions and millions of people now seem to be above the law, people who are here illegally, who were never authorized by Congress to be here, never authorized by the American people, we are, as Dick Lamb said many, many years ago, quote, "We are building a deadly disunity." That disunity is happening right before our eyes. People are self-segregating into different states. They are relocating around people who have shared political views. This is not a recipe for a coherent nation, politically moving forward. It's not a recipe for the kind of country we want to leave to our grandchildren. Now, a lot of Americans are saying, so what? Every 4 years, we're just going to vote for somebody different, and it goes back and forth. Well, the evolution of this process means we have an executive branch that has become a lawless dictatorship, that every 4 years when it changes hands, or 8 years, that lawlessness just simply takes a different form. Congress becomes increasingly irrelevant, increasingly marginalized. Now, we can all pretend to ignore this. We can take the path of the ostrich. But in truth, the ostrich has never been conspicuous as a strategy for success. In fact, facing real-world problems is the only way to deal with this. Managing flows of people coming across our border is about managing expectations. As Americans, we all have an obligation to stem the tide and stop this invasion of our country. We can only do that if we have political leadership that recognizes the expectations of those hundreds of millions of people all over the world are being fueled by policies that have been put in place intentionally and are being ignored intentionally by the current administration. This is something of a national crisis, the dimensions of which are really immeasurable and beyond comprehension. It is impossible to deliver good quality public education, good quality health care, housing, possible to deliver an infrastructure that works, quality of life, transportation, and other amenities that we all rely on to be able to even function, get to work, stay healthy, get adequate health care, housing, whatever you have, it can't be achieved without effective immigration and perimeter controls. There are very few voices now we see in our national leadership that are speaking the truth about the nature of this issue. Immigration enforcement happens not only at the border, it has to happen in the interior. The Democrats seem to be committed to a strategy that decimates immigration enforcement at every conceivable level. A nation has to change course if it wants to survive. Our nation has to change course if it wants to survive. While the immigration issue seems to be at some level receding in the strength of the magnitude of the massive issues we face now with the economy, inflation, education, critical race theory, whatever you want to call it, the decline of our public schools, the disappearing middle class, the favoritism being played by politicians who are engaging in just rampant vote buying. We need to understand the motivations behind what the Biden administration is doing here. Vote buying, whether it's relieving people of debts or forgiving people or giving people checks or special benefits, or simply trying to make people indebted to you for having let you cross our borders illegally, which appears to be the case in some quixotic effort to achieve political loyalty long term. These things are anti-American and fundamentally contrary to every aspect of our national interest. Americans need to wake up to the dangers here, the reality of what this means long term. No nation can sustain this. No nation possibly can. Political leaders need to take a look at world history and see what happens to nations that sustain this for any length of time. There are people on the left who are now arguing that because of what they call climate change, we are going to be inundated with hundreds of millions of people no matter what we do, no matter how we try to control our borders. Their strategy as environmentalists is to simply increase density in the cities by growing buildings up and then importing resources from all over the world and becoming energy dependent and dependent upon other countries, even potentially for food. This is a dramatic change in America's course and American history. It all boils down to whether or not we're going to have the self-determination as a people to decide who and how many people can enter this country. FAIR is committed to staying in this fight. We know this is a difficult time. We know all of you are concerned about the future of the country. We know all of you are hoping the nation chooses a different path. We will know more in the next few months. Whatever happens in November, FAIR is prepared to hit the ground running in January. We have been working with members of Congress on a series of proposals to hold the administration accountable for its extraordinary perfidy and misfeasance. They will feel the wrath of those consequences probably in a few months. But in the meantime, I cannot let you be discouraged. We got to stick together to stay in this fight. America's future depends upon it. We depend on you. Thank you.